Do you still live in this property?
I'd also like to thank Annie Bournet for the beautiful music she played. Oh, played. And let's see if you were. No.
I just put this together a few minutes ago. Hi, I'm Ann Everts. I'm the daughter of Florence Everts. Thank you for joining us to celebrate the celebration of her life. She had a marvelous life. She was a woman way ahead of her time. She had to leave Australia to come over to this country to get a PhD. They didn't have PhDs in Australia at that time. She was very smart and extremely witty in that British way. Sorry about that. I always liked one thing. She never really gossiped. She sort of talked about things, but she was never like one to dig or gossip about people. And that was a very refreshing thing. My father loved to gossip and tell stories, but she never did. She never ever looked backwards in life with regrets. Her strength, I always felt with it. She always was looking forward to the next adventure, the next thing she was going to do, to have fun with her friends, with her gardens. She always was looking forward. And I think that is one of the reasons she lived so long, because she was never having any regrets. She just kept on chugging through. She really loved her friends, and it would mean the world, to her to have all of you here celebrating her life. And she also loved her gardens. They meant the world to her. That was her way of sort of thanking the world and celebrating her art form. Thank you very much for celebrating this day. My daughter, my Jasmine, and my grandson, Mateo. We want to thank you very much for being here and celebrating with us. Thank you.
Okay.
It is a beautiful day. A little warm, but a beautiful September day. It's the kind of day that Florence would have been sitting outside her garden, a cup of tea on the table, a book in her hand, a faithful dog by her side. And Jasmine, there will never be another like her. And we extend our collective sympathy to you and our shared grief. All of us here loved Florence, and I don't think I'm alone in saying that I was also in awe of Florence. Her beauty, her brains, her pluck, her kindness, her honesty, and her humility, and the joy that she carried with her and shared so generously. If we are all lucky, we will grow old. But Florence actually did grow old. She continued to push herself to create, to stay current and connected, and to bring beauty to the world how and where she could. That included always being immaculately dressed herself. So as we gather here today, celebrating a life that in so many ways mirrors an old growth garden, we have the privilege of hearing from some of her family and friends who shared her wonderful life. We will begin with Don Partland, who remained so devoted to Florence throughout her life and is responsible for so much of today. Don?
I first met Florence in 1984 when I was beginning my work at a design firm in Alexandria. A mutual friend had suggested me as an illustrator for a project that Florence and Martha had in Islamabad, Pakistan. And I think my friend said something like, "Oh, you'll like Florence. She's classy." Yeah. And that's definitely a true statement. And then what started as a simple professional relationship grew into a 4-decade-long friendship that was enriching, but mainly fun and really interesting. And being friends with Florence meant you got to know her husband, Stocky, and learning about their lives in the foreign service. And together they made a formidable and entertaining team. From my first meeting with Florence to my last dinner with Florence, she was always generous with her time and her expertise, and had an unwavering dedication to professional excellence. And she, as Anna said, and fearless about trying new things. Florence was very much a plants person, but as I got to know her, she revealed that she was incredibly knowledgeable about abstract ideas of texture and layering and creating really true garden moments. And as I helped her out in her first in the book that you'll have a chance to take, hopefully, I got to see that firsthand. And her own garden was something of a laboratory where I learned dozens of new plants, and simply by walking through the seasonal displays created with the help of Mike Anderson. There were the spectacular pink tulips in the spring and the dramatic caladiums in the summer. And so she knew how to use plants to express seasons and also how to create moments of joy. And a note about her amazing resilience. I know everybody has stories. I think the Australian term is battler, but maybe that's not quite the right term, but she was always a battler, just with the idea of you couldn't keep her down. I'll never forget the story of Florence driving herself to Sibley Hospital with a broken rib after a stair collapsed at a client's house. And that wasn't, well, it's a little bit of recklessness, but that was Florence's just natural determination. She approached challenges in the same way that she approached that Chancery site. Was Chancery? In Islamabad. She assessed the situation, she made a plan, and she got to work. And in closing, perhaps what I'll remember most about Florence was her gift of friendship. And she had what one friend called spontaneous warmth. She was hospitable and fun, and she was always interested in doing things. And Florence understood that being a good friend meant showing up for projects, for causes, for celebrations, and for the simple pleasure of sharing what she knew about plants and life. Thank you.
Florence and Stocky's love story was one that spanned decades and continents. Rob Everts is Stocky's nephew. Rob, I know that you and your brother have some words.
Yeah.
Morning shadow. I heard the currawongs cry as they swooped above me. The news they told was, you can't change the weather. And who would want to? Walking out very early with pink and grey galahs tumbling for brass ends. I picked a fig from the laden tree in the garden and heard a voice that spoke in a tongue of flame from the fiery sun behind the trembling treetop. You are lucky to be alive in these terrible times. I peeled back the green of the fig, breaking into its centre, galah-coloured, pink and grey, its 1,000 flowers, and ate of the fruit of the garden and understood the voice that seemed to flash in the air above me. The message must be received, taken into one's being, as knowledge is taken, biting on apple or fig. Terrible times in the world that will not be changed, and I walking out on such a morning early. Yeah. So I was very fortunate. I moved to London at the turn of the millennium, and very fortunate then to be able to come and see Florence and Anne and the family, Florence and Stocky, a lot. It was a great privilege for me to come and see them and to meet many of you, which has been a great enhancement to my life. And I was very grateful to have the opportunity to learn from Florence. She had such style. And I think my domestic environment was heavily influenced by that simmering. 49th Street, Northwest. It was so elegant and beautiful and carefully put together. So, and I valued her greatly for herself, but I know that from my mother and she both, sorry, I meant to do this. My mother and she both thought the other was completely amazing, and they couldn't believe that each other would be their friend. You know, my mother thought Florence was so amazing and radiant and wonderful, and Florence wrote me Dawson. You know, she's a poet. So that was a very nice friendship. So the other poem I'm going to read is the last poem my mother wrote. She and I were sitting in a car. We used to drive her down to the lake, and my mother, when she was very elderly, would drive down to the lake in Canberra, and we'd look at the lake and the hills, and we usually did it at evening when the sky went kind of melon-coloured. Anyway, she started this poem then, and we wrote it, well, she wrote it. So, it's called Poem for Florence. We are sitting here, listening to, and I, thousands of miles away, all earth and sky, and have you with us. We sit and see, like you, quite clear, the light that, travelling far, makes us all near, erasing distance. The light illumines and enwraps us three, you there, we here, thoughtful perhaps, each for the other. Thank you. There was no better friend than Florence. Through the years and across the globe, Florence made and kept strong relationships with friends like the Green family. Meg Green and her mother Margaret are here today with us, and Meg will speak to us on behalf of Meg. No points for speed here. I'm Meg, and this is my mother, Margaret, and we looked forward very much to sharing some remarks about Florence, but of course we found the actual writing quite daunting. Florence was such a remarkable person, as everyone here knows, and how could we possibly capture her essence in a few words? So we settled on two big themes, one which my mother's going to address, which is how Florence, so perfectly named, wove beauty into our lives, planting from Iran to Pakistan to Washington, D.C. And then I will say a little bit about Florence's respectful disregard for age and the conventions of age. Well, I met my husband in New York, where he was with the State Department, and he was sent there because he spoke several languages, and they had a lot of foreign visitors, right? And so, because he knew all these languages, they immediately sent him for Farsi training. So began the process there. It was a new building and it had no trees at all in the compound. It was a beautiful place, but they'd taken down all the trees. So, as a result, we immediately saw the need of trees, and we knew Florence, and so we contacted her, because they were in Isfahan, and she came up there and saw what was needed, and that meant we could order these trees from, somewhere near Tehran. And so all these trees were sent up there, and she had specified what should be planted where. And it changed the place entirely. So on the last year we spent in Tabriz, we expanded on her ideas even more. And if you look at a picture on Google Earth, and if you're able to identify the location of the former U.S. consulate, it was a very big property with a very beautiful building and residence built by an American architect. It stands out as a lush oasis of trees surrounded by dense and dusty residential neighborhoods. When we were living in Pakistan in the 1980s, Florence was hired to landscape the ambassador's residence, and what a treat it was for Tom and me to appreciate how well recognized she was professionally, and to enjoy extended personal visits with her when we moved back to the Washington area. And we asked Florence in the early 2000s to set her sights on our front garden, and it remains a standout in Tulip Hill in Bethesda. Florence was a lovely, gracious friend we frequently saw with her family on many occasions, and with whom we shared memories stretching back to the 1960s. I will miss her a lot. Thank you.
Now I'm just going to speak briefly to the respectful disregard for the conventions of age. The Everetts were always my parents' friends, but at some point I was lucky enough to develop my own friendship with Florence, and it was wonderful meeting up with her because her life and way of being always seemed to offer me guidance and direction without my having to ask for it. I'd like to share just one of her insights with you. It wasn't only respectful disregard for the conventions of age, it was cheerful disregard. So some years ago I invited Florence to my birthday party, and it was clear that turning 50 I was feeling sad about aging. She came for the evening, bounding up the 2 flights of stairs to our front door, and brought as a gift a poem that she'd written for the occasion. Now, for all of her amazing qualities, Florence was not in the running to become our next poet laureate. However, the poem that she shared that evening had a message for me that has been so memorable and so catchy that I recite the last line inside my head all the time. She wrote, "So enjoy the days ahead to dance and sing, and as the year advances, have your fling. Just watch the ball, dear Meg, and do your thing." Which was, of course, how Florence lived her life. She had at least 2 interesting and demanding careers, as well as being a superb Foreign Service spouse, which is a career in itself, and she kept working well into her 90s. When I was in my late 50s, she asked me what my intended second career was going to be, as if it was the most obvious and natural thing to start afresh and change gears to do something you'd always wanted to do. And I started thinking about opportunities and interests, and indeed that has helped me weather the recent obliteration of work in foreign assistance, because I had some ideas about other things that would be of interest. I had a work trip to Geneva in 2019, and on the return flight, I spotted someone who looked like Florence sleeping in a window seat. She would have been in her mid-90s at the time. I couldn't believe my eyes. I just kept going up and down the aisle and looking at this person, and fortunately, Anne soon appeared to ground me in the reality that indeed, at age 97, Florence had been overseeing work on a friend's garden not far from Geneva. Thank you, Anne, for making that possible.
I'm so surprised to see you.
It was, it was very surprising altogether. So I'm just so grateful for so many elegant occasions at Stocky and Florence's house, the introductions to lovely people, the advice about how to configure my living room furniture so it could take better advantage of the view out the window, which is of course another Florence lesson, outward looking. She loved entertaining and otherwise getting together with friends and family and introducing her friends to each other. And it was perfect that she could live in Anne's busy household during the last years of her life. So Florence was so important to those of us who were more on the periphery of her life. And Jasmine, Listen, other close friends and family must feel this loss even more acutely. To you, I offer only that the lovely memory of Florence leaves us with images and feelings and understandings that we will take forward across our lifetimes.
Thank you, Margaret. And Florence did have a real career of note. Charles Birnbaum is the president and CEO of the Cultural Landscape Foundation here in Washington. He knew both Florence and her work very well. Charles.
Greetings. I'm not going to talk a lot about Florence the gardener because, as they like to say, it's in the book. And, I do think that most people know Florence as a gardener. I came to DC in 1992, and if you were to draw a map over the District of Columbia at that time, I went there to work for the Park Service. There were stealth, courageous, unsinkable women, most of which operated below the radar. I would say if you were to parse the District of Columbia at that time into a map, Darlene Neal, who many know at the National Park Service, probably had the monumental core covered. Moving northwest, Sally Boasberg, another great gardener, another self-trained gardener, and like Florence taught at GW, she had the northwest covered, and I would say a net over all the trees in the district. And Florence was always my go-to person when it came to Georgetown. So what I wanted to do first is open with a statement of Florence's, which is, as landscape architects, we view our role as responsible stewards of the land who are committed to the belief that development of the land must not only serve the needs of the community, but it must also be respectful of its impacts on the natural environment. And I chose that quote because it's not Florence the gardener, it's Florence the steward. Because I think how most people know Florence, to quote Adrian Higgins in the introduction to her book, he says, "I know many landscape architects with a deep knowledge and love of plants." And then there's Florence Everts. He goes on, "When I think of Florence, I think of her first as a gardener, but only because she was such a good gardener." And I want to just say that the Florence that I knew was a warrior. And it's always incredible to me when there are people who operate below the radar. I met Florence through Don Partlin, who we heard from earlier, and it was love at first sight for me personally, because she was fearless. I was a new kid in the bureaucracy, trying to figure out how a straight line was always slalom. And then what happened, and I know many people will remember this story, there was a library proposed underground on the North Vista in Dumbarton Oaks. And Florence drew a line in the sand and she said, this is not going to happen. And that is how I got to know Florence. And she was absolutely fearless and strategic and tenacious. One librarian even lost their job at Dumbarton Oaks because of leakage of information. And I can say today that Florence's fingerprints were probably part of that equation. And so for all of us that were part of that, and I want to also just give a big shout out to Beth Meyer, who also was the other person in my connective tissue and my friendship with Florence. So I think we're at a moment, and I think about us being in this building, which is dedicated to women, if you will, and the need for us to actually lead by example when it comes to speaking out and stepping up and making those wise decisions about the stewardship of our shared legacy. Florence may have looked back to look forward. I don't think she turned her back on the past. The past was full of stories that could be retold and rekindled for future generations. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. I want to thank all the speakers who did such a wonderful job bringing their parts of their life that Florence touched so deeply. But there are others in this room for whom Florence was a huge influence, a very good friend. And for those of you who would like the opportunity to stand up and say a few words now, share some of those remembrances with us, I'd invite you to do so now. And I want to start with Thaddeus back there.
Thank you so much, Nancy, and my condolences, Anne and Jasmine, and all of us, right? Florence was a member of our extended family in so many ways. I met Florence in 2013, so not long ago, and we had just moved to Washington. I grew up in Washington, but I had been living abroad for most of my career in Belgium and Switzerland. And in 2013, me and my family got transferred back to Washington, D.C., something that we never thought would happen. But we did. We came back to Washington and lived in a little apartment in DuPont Circle for a couple months until we found a house. And we bought a little house in Georgetown. And the house in Georgetown had this catastrophic little garden. I mean, it was really, there was nothing there. And it was the first time we had lived in a place that had a garden. We've been living in apartments in Europe most of the time. And so I was at Politics and Prose, looking through the garden books, trying to find inspiration, right? And there's this book, The Gardens of Florence Evarts, sitting on the shelf. And I opened up this book and I started looking through it and I said, oh, wonderful. It's not the usual sort of gravel and concrete and you know, gardens have become very sort of conceptual these days. But her gardens were full of romance and color, but beautiful structure as well. And I didn't know much about gardening. My father was a big gardener, but I was not interested in gardening at that time in my life. But so, and then we saw the garden of some friends of our family, the Huffbauers, who had a house in Chevy Chase, Maryland, and I had played in that garden as a kid. And so that persuaded me. I was going to contact this Florence Evarts. I had never heard of her. Looked her up on the internet, and someone answered the phone, Evarts and Associates. And so we made an appointment, and Florence came to our house. This must have been in like late 2000, maybe early 2014. And someone talked about what a beautiful dresser Florence was. She showed up in a tailleur, you know, like a little, and she had some beautiful perfume on and some beautiful shoes. I looked at her and I thought, wow, this lady is really elegant. And I was completely charmed by her. You know, she came into our little house and we talked about the Huffbauers, of course. and they knew the Haftars going all the way back to Pakistan, because my father was posted in Lahore before the Everettses were in Islamabad, and so I have memories of my childhood living there, but so we just had this incredibly candid and wonderful interaction, people who had never met each other, and so of course the project was on, right, and I got to see Florence, like a real artist, pulling together all of these artisans and people who shared her aesthetic vision. I think Jose, you were the mason for the project in our garden, and she pulled in so many wonderful artisans, artists. I don't know, people who create gardens are they have the soul of artists for sure. And so, she created this rather theatrical garden for our little house in Georgetown with a lion's fountain in the wall and a pergola, and I learned so much from her about gardening, but also about life. I mean, it was hard for me to imagine that she had emigrated to the United States in the 40s. She was this sort of, I could have never guessed her age when she came to our house for the first time, but she was in her 90s at that point, for sure. And that was just the beginning. I mean, the house in Georgetown turned out beautifully, but our adventure in Washington took us back to Switzerland after 2 years. My family is Swiss, and it was hard for them to adapt to living in this imperial town. So we've been living in Geneva ever since. But when we went back to Geneva, we moved back into the European style apartment, and I was in mourning for having a garden. And so a year later, we sold the apartment and bought this house, this 18th century little country house in the Geneva countryside with an acre of land and views of the mountains and the vineyards. But the house was the house had no connection at all with the landscape. There was no landscaping, there was no shrubbery, there was a very talented lady had lived there. She was the principal harp player in the Orchestre de la Suisse Romande. So there were harps everywhere in the house, but there was nothing in the garden. And so we called Florence, and she came over. I think the first trip, she came over with Suzanne, is my recollection. And all of the beautiful drawings that were, created for this tiny little garden that we had in Washington, all of a sudden there were much bigger drawings for a house that was a lot larger and a garden a house that sang awkwardly in the landscape. So I mean, we still live in that house, and every day look at that garden and think about how lucky we are to have had her vision. I mean, the soul of an artist, honestly. And so many other memories. I mean, listen, the garden tour that we went with your brother and Florence, it was the week of the Brexit vote. I'll never forget. We were in these magnificent English gardens, some of them cottage gardens, some of them palaces, and Florence had some sort of insight about everything that we were visiting, some beautiful insight. And then I remember, I'll never forget, I love opera. In fact, I went to conservatory before I went to law school. And so I've always been someone who had symphony tickets in the opera. Well, I had tickets for the Ring Cycle here in Washington, the entire Ring Cycle in a week. And it was something that I was ready to do, it was, and Florence, I think the person I was supposed to go with canceled. And so I invited Florence. Now, this is really a testament to someone's attention to art. Florence sat with me, rapt, 4 hours, 5 hours. I mean, there were, I think, 4 operas in 10 days, over 20 hours of Wagner, and Florence didn't lose. I mean, she was there for every second of it. And so, so lucky. I feel so blessed to have gotten to know her, and to have gotten to know so many people that were in her environment, that were touched by her art, and also by her beautiful personality, her generosity. I do consider her a soulmate even today, and you know, to such a degree that Mike is still coming to sort of help that garden enjoy its evolution. So Mike comes to work with us twice a year now, and to keep that legacy that Florence that established in Geneva in Switzerland. So what an incredible coincidence that you bumped into them in 2019 on the way back from working with us. Anyway, I've gone on for way too long. I could go on for so much.
Mike. Mike,
Mike, yes, Mike, please.
AKA Florence's right-hand man.
Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Mike Anderson. I've prepared something. I'll be brief. I had the singular privilege of spending a day each week for more than 20 years with Florence. We worked steadily together in her garden and with many other projects. She was a master of her craft and, as we all know, an extraordinary person. Florence played many roles in all of our lives. For me, she was a client, a mentor, and a friend. As a client, she taught me the discipline of a gardener's practice, to constantly and uncompromisingly work towards exceptionalism and beauty. As a mentor, she demonstrated the grace that encompasses this kind of practice. To tirelessly, sometimes relentlessly, and always patiently insist on excellence. To command the garden to be its best while also allowing it to do what it will. To hold the long view, to intend, to expect, and to accept. These qualities blend into the most important role that Florence played for all of us, that of a true friend. She maintained an immense commitment to the seasonality of relationship, to the thrills and the spills, to the joys and disappointments, to the humor and sorrow. Her commitment to share relationship with all of us is what we can carry along. Her contributions to all of our lives and to mine are immeasurable.
Would anyone else like to say a few words about us? Yes, please.
Hi, everyone. I'm Martha Donnelly. Florence and I were business partners for about 10 years in the 1980s. So I certainly wanted to share with you some memories. Florence and I met through Karen Kuhn, a fully employed landscape architect whose day job interfered with her providing technical details fast enough for Florence's landscape projects. Enter me. My first assignment was to provide a railroad tie retaining wall details for her neighbor and friend. Slowly, I graduated to full partnership. And this partnership was blessed with two very healthy egos, as reflected in the name of the company. Sometimes it was Florence Everts and Martha Donnelly. Sometimes it was Everts and Donnelly. I think our bank account was Donnelly, Everts and Associates, but don't quote me, I'm not sure. In any case, our firm began when I was in my early 30s and a new mother, while Florence, in her 60s, was being interviewed by Joe Volz of the Los Angeles Times for an article entitled, "Gardening Has Invigorating Rewards for the Elderly." We each had our own clients, but collaborated heavily. For instance, it would not be uncommon for Florence, in considering a home entrance layout, might look upwards slightly, fingering her toes, say, why don't we give them some Daphne or Laurel? It's fragrant. In the beginning, we would ferry between my Adams Morgan home, row house, with a front room office area separated from the second floor stairs by a bed sheet to our office. To her tastefully designed perch, designed by a prominent DC architect, with blue and white floral pillows, and a treetop framed view of her soon-to-be published garden. Our next phase was the young couple real estate saga, in which Tom and I bought land in Upper Northwest and built our home. So we moved into my mother's home on Patterson Street. I fashioned an office in the basement, and Florence gamely followed, entering through the garage utility room into a vintage 1950s rec room, furnished with sawhorse tables, covered with drawings for our biggest project, the master plan for our 35-acre embassy in Islamabad, Pakistan. Nothing could be more fun than traveling to Pakistan for that necessary site visit that required a month's stay during the monsoon season. Talk about hot. Every day field dress for me was loose pants and a short sleeve cotton top and a floppy hat, while Florence wore a khaki skirt, long sleeve linen blouse, and an umbrella. Inside the chancery, where we had a tiny office, there was a poster on the bulletin board charting in full color all the poisonous snakes. It more than caught my attention, but Florence, not so much. We stayed at the Holiday Inn and dined on chicken tikka almost every night. And when we sat close enough to the adjoining kitchen, one could see on the swinging doors a notice in large letters, "Kill the flies." Back in DC during design development, Don Partland was our executive illustrator. He would appear late in the afternoons after leaving his day job at EDOF. "Oh, Don, oh, good. Can you just sketch this pathway? And then the chancery entrance. And then after that, the gazebo." Don happily complied. The following summer, we returned to present our preliminary master plan of drawings and an explanatory report. At the request of Ambassador Hummel, we traveled to Pakistan by way of China to investigate and provide concepts for our U.S. Embassy's 3 rental properties in Beijing. Florence's knowledge of diplomatic protocol was invaluable as we familiarized ourselves with each site. She knew to request meetings with the Chinese official who, on inspecting the barren rectangular Sanbad site, could point to nothing and say there was a tree there, and there, and there. And following a formal meeting with an upper level official, Florence ordered a rose bush from Jackson Perkins in gratitude for his time. Absolutely not a bribe. On to Islamabad, where presentations of our master plan were received warmly, and our 2-week stay afforded even more freebies in terms of executing small design projects. Our trips were punctuated by excursions. In China, we visited the Great Wall and their flea markets filled with amazing items that, no matter how mundane, were beautifully decorated. It was there that Florence shared with me that the more sophisticated strands of pearls were always graduating themselves. In Istanbul, we visited their biggest bazaar. I bought earrings while Florence bought small swan figurines used as name card holders. They just need a little resilvering. In Rawalpindi, we bought rugs. My favorite to this day is a Senna Kalim. In England, we toured historic gardens for days. Florence drove and we only hit the curb once, despite my constant level of panic. Kidcote, Starhead, Hestercombe, and others. Lastly, our last office location was my home, 2612 Northampton Street Northwest, the last parcel of a 16-acre farm that I designed a house specifically to include a lower level office with a walkout patio and off-street parking. There we continued to work and receive a few awards as part of the winning teams on various projects. Hearst Hall at the National Cathedral School for Girls, and the Laurel Center, a shopping center in Laurel, Maryland. Our partnership weathered all those highs and lows that are inherent in a long-term relationship, but did not, nor could not, stand outside or be independent from the larger dynamics of family life, especially when the office is part of the home. In the end, we parted with respect for each other's commitment to a quality of design that hopefully has improved the lives of our clients. A postscript on Islamabad. None of our suggestions were implemented except for the Rose Garden and Promontory Gazebo. It was dedicated to Arnie Rafel, our ambassador who died in the plane crash with President Zia and Brigadier General Wassam in 1988. One further note, the embassy perimeter that had been breached by mobs in 1979 needed to be secured. Despite Florence's wise recommendation to plant a very thorny shrub, here I go, the Verenda bush, does anybody know?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Verenda bush, to protect the compound, the embassy built the brick wall with guard towers.
Hi everybody, my name is Sharon Ziegler, and my parents met Stocky and Florence at the University of Chicago. And for my whole life, I have always known Stocky and Florence, Stocky and Florence. I always knew about them. And then at some point, when I became older, I actually knew who they were as people. My mother, so you all know about her gardens, and I didn't know that. I'm very happy to be here as a representative of my family, who knew them so well. I didn't know that much about her garden, except that my mother was a gardener. She was a master gardener, and they had always lots of stuff to talk about gardening, so I'm very happy to hear about all of that. And I just have to admit, when I go to a garden, so my garden is, it's okay. But whenever I go to a garden store, I have a panic attack because I don't know what kind of plant to get, so I could use some help. Anyway, so I think, so Stocky and Florence and Anne and Jasmine came to our house many times for Thanksgivings. And a long time ago, like Jasmine was in 5th grade, she got all of us to put on a little Thanksgiving play. She wrote it, she said who we were, we all had little masks or little things, and we had a Thanksgiving play with them. And I think the last time I saw your mom was actually years ago at the Women's March, and stayed with Anne, and met your mom afterwards. And as a family physician, I was impressed with her going up all those stairs up to a 2nd floor in a restaurant. She was like, went right up. So I've learned a few things about her and things I'm going to take, like she would give advice very nicely about what to do, what's your next act in life anyway. So it's very nice to be here, and condolences to everybody.
Hello.
Hi.
My name is Anthony Hyatt, and I had the privilege of knowing Florence and Stocky through being a carpenter's assistant. The carpenter is this gentleman right here, Peter Wexler, the master carpenter who designed and built, and I helped him, the ting, which is the structure, the Japanese structure at the top of the hill in her garden. It's there, it's in the book. And it was an amazing experience for a lot of reasons. Peter had trained in Japan with as apprenticing with Japanese carpenters in traditional techniques, and was learning as he went and doing an amazing job. And what happens, it's a fairly unique thing to be doing this kind of traditional joinery, and there are very few clients who actually can afford, have the patience for, and care for having something of this nature created. Let me say that some of the clients that Peter got to work with were not ideal clients. However, I don't even know the story of how you first met Florence, but she was committed to having something very special in her garden. And getting to work on that something special was an extraordinary special experience for us, because she loved the fact that it took longer than we expected because we were caring for the details of how it was going to work. She loved the fact that we were thinking about each little thing, and that she was too, so that the exact stone that would be created to have scribed to fit the exact post to hold the structure up was going to be precisely what everybody wanted. And at the same time as that was happening, what was communicated to us was the care that Florence had for people who worked for her. It was love. It was like really, really, like beyond even just respect. So that when you look through her book of the creations, I imagine that she treated each worker who worked on those creations with really respect that you give to a master artist, and collaborative way of thinking. And it was so important and so valuable, and that she would take care of us so that as we were working each afternoon, we would pause for tea and biscuits. And the biscuits she had made, they weren't just like, Chips Ahoy or something, I still have her recipe for lacy oatmeal cookies, and I make it periodically because I love them. And so I really feel that embodied in that garden is the relationships that she built and the kind of way that she treated people. And as a result, almost 40 years later, we remain friends. And I love that. I love that, Anne. Your mom was something else.
Words have a great ability to bring joy and remind us so clearly of moments and times now past. They can also be a very important balm for the parts of us that long for what was. Thank you all for sharing yours. Most of us aspire to leave the world a better place. Rare is the person who actually does that. Rarer still is the person who leaves the world not only a better place, but a more beautiful one. That is Florence's gift to each and every one of us, and to the world. Thank you, Florence. Thank you for all of you who shared her life, celebrated her life today, and will do so going forward. And now, at the point where we're getting to Wagnerian length, let's go and enjoy a party, because that's what Florence would want. And yes, Anne.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. Before you exit, my mother wrote a beautiful book. and it is about all the gardens she worked on, or some of them. I would love you to, as you're exiting, please take one with you as a keepsake. Thank you.